Never Prank Shinso. Written by Agent Arc 88 on Wattpad and Tumblr. You've been waiting behind the counter all morning for your target to arrive, stifling your own giggles as you peered over the counter at the coffee pot. You were notorious for pranking your fellow students at UA, and everyone was always on edge around you on April Fool's Day. They could rest easy today though, because your sights were set on someone who no one else dared to prank. Shinso. You'd heard the stories. He'd sworn off pranking because he was too good at it. He could dish out the jokes but couldn't take them. Or, if you even attempted to trick him, you'd turn to stone. Of course, you put this down as mere rumors, especially since most of it came from Kaminari, but there still appeared to be this unspoken rule at UA. You should never prank Shinso. You took this as a challenge. Your prankster prowess had served you well, ranging from the mundane water bucket over the door to the extreme, where you managed to get your hands on Mr. Aizawa's capture weapon and strung it up on the highest tree on UA campus. You'd almost gotten expelled for that jape, but it didn't keep you from continuing your pranking escapades. It tickled you to joke and laugh, and it was even better to have a day to excuse yourself from your regular antics. The door to the common area kitchen opened and you pressed yourself against the back of the countertop. You positioned yourself just out of sight, so you could watch your prank unfold but not be spotted. Shinso stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and yawning. He stretched his arms over his head, rubbing sleep out of his tired eyes. Normally, he'd be the first one to start the coffee pot in the morning, ensuring he'd get his much-needed caffeine fix. You'd attempted to make the coffee for him, once or twice, but he insisted that he do it, saying that he made it the best. Shinso spotted your note before he noticed the filled pot. He lifted up the piece of paper, holding it between his slender fingers and chuckling to himself. He shook his head.
I told them they didn't have to make me coffee.
He muttered under his breath, groggily.
I should be the last person they need to worry about.
Guilt washed through you. You'd originally thought Shinso didn't want you touching the coffee because he made it better. That's what he told you. From his current words, however, it seemed like he just didn't want to be a bother. Your note had been simple. An invitation for freshly made coffee for Shinso with your signature at the bottom. You meant for message to be a way that the prank would be indisputably your doing. But now you almost wish you'd never put salt into Shinso's coffee. You could turn back now, but it would mean that UA's infamous prankster backed down from the most alluring challenge. Shinso poured a cup of coffee for himself, not bothering to put in any cream or sugar as usual. He sighed, and despite the fact you could easily be caught, you had to cover up another giggle. Shinso finally took a sip. His expression immediately soured. You were hoping for him to sputter out the liquid, but instead, his violet glare set on where you were hidden, his scowl only deepening. You pouted, hoping he hadn't seen you as you quietly sat in place, no longer peering over the counter. That was certainly not the reaction a trickster like you was looking for. You heard the mug hit the countertop, and you jumped, let out an unearthly noise when you caught sight of Shinso leaning around the countertop, looking directly at you. He was blocking your only easy exit.
I don't know what's more disappointing. The fact that you thought I didn't know you were hiding here, or the fact you actually pranked me when I gave you the benefit of the doubt.
April Fools! You said. You shrugged nervously, scrambling to your feet. Silence filled the space. It was just a joke, you offered, still a little miffed that he didn't really react to the salty coffee in the first place. Shinso rolled his eyes lazily, making his way to you in only a few steps on a cord of his height. You gulped, eyeing the kitchen door that was still unfortunately positioned on the other side of the pranked. Your back hit the far wall, and you smiled, as if to gain Shinso's favor.
You know the rules, don't you?
Shinso asked, his voice growing lower. He pressed one hand against the wall, leaning way too close to you. A deep blush bloomed over your cheeks. Your heart raced in your chest. They were just rumors, weren't they? There was no way that Shinso actually shouldn't be pranked. If what Kaminari told you was true, then your little trick would have far dire consequences than you expected. You're not going to turn me to stone, are you? Huh? You asked, smiling nervously. Shinso's face blanked before he let out a low, rumbling chuckle.
I'm afraid for pranking a retired prankster, the consequences are far worse than that.
He leaned back, his half-hooded eyes alluding to the danger that was to come.
You'll know why you don't mess with my morning coffee by the end of the day.
Shinso turned away, leaving you weak-kneed where you were standing, not even giving you further details about his upcoming shenanigans. Shinso? What do you mean by that? You stuttered out. Shinso stopped just at the kitchen door, holding it open and grinning like Mr. Aizawa would have if you challenged him.
You'll see,
was the last cryptic thing he said before disappearing. Needless to say, the rest of your morning was spent jumping at shadows. Because you didn't know how Shinso was going to get his revenge, you couldn't leave anything to chance. He'd have to strike within the same day if he wanted to adhere to the April Fool's Day tradition, if he even cared for the tradition at all. Unfortunately for you, you still had classes to attend, so you couldn't just hide out in your room. The bell rang for the end of classes, and you were like a timid cat, bristling at the slightest sound. You peered around the corner, panic setting your heartbeat at racing speeds. You nearly jumped out of your skin when you felt someone tap you on the shoulder. You breathed out a sigh of relief when you saw Midoriya standing there, instead of Shinso.
I didn't mean to startle you.
He fidgeted in front of you for a moment.
I just wanted to say thank you for the gift. Shinso managed to give it to me between classes.
Your face paled as your brain attempted to catch up to what the broccoli boy was saying to you. Your eyes trained on the gift you'd supposedly gotten for him. You raised an eyebrow as he continued to ramble, narrowing your eyes at the strange object. Shinso couldn't have possibly gotten Midoriya on his side to prank you. He was too innocent for those kinds of shenanigans.
I mean, I didn't even know that All Might was coming out with a limited edition set of binoculars. They must have cost you a fortune. I bet they're good quality though,
he said. He pressed the binoculars to his face, jolting back and smiling.
Oops, too close,
he said, chuckling. Once he pulled them away from his face, your eyes widened in realization. 2 dark ink rings were painted around poor Midoriya's eyes. Your voice caught in your throat, while he continued to gush over the very fake present you hadn't actually gotten him. His emerald eyes slowly trailed down, his gaze meeting the face of his watch. He stopped, mid-sentence, panic striking his features.
Oh, I'm supposed to meet up with All Might. Anyway, thanks again.
Midoriya took off in a sprint.
Wait! Deku! I didn't get you.
You trailed off, lowering your hand when he turned the corner without turning back. In retrospect, you should have warned him sooner. You wondered if All Might would tell him the binoculars weren't authentic, or if a student was going to laugh at the marks on his face first. If Shinso pranked Midoriya using your name, you had a pretty good idea what made him so dangerous as a prankster and what his intentions were for revenge. Sure, poor sweet Midoriya was gullible, but with your track record of tricks around this particular holiday, it left you completely suspect for any ill happenings around campus. You couldn't help but feel a pit in your stomach. You should have never pranked Shinso. Now it was going to be a race to stop him before he completely ruined your pranking reputation. Or worse, he pranked the wrong UA student. You briefly considered what would happen if Shinso pranked Bakugo under your name. You weren't exactly prepared to be blown up into next week for salty coffee. You rushed to the dormitories, hoping to plead for forgiveness. You would have done a much more extreme prank if you knew Shinso was going to react the way he did. Just as you entered the front doorway of the dorms, you nearly tripped over a set of cords and wires. Jiro had a hand covering her mouth as she was stifling laughter. Kaminari had about 20 different electronics he was charging at the same time. He completely short-circuited and was now giving the wall a double thumbs up.
Oh, there you are.
Jiro sputtered out a few more giggles.
I normally hate your pranks, but this one is hilarious. Kaminari was so excited you'd asked a favor from him, he didn't even think about what it would do to his head.
Your gaze shifted from her to Kaminari, who made a sound that couldn't be discerned into human words. His head bobbled around, and he continued to shift around the room with a goofy grin on his face.
I didn't...
You stopped yourself. What's done was done at this point. Shinso wouldn't stop here, and you had to catch him before he got to your other classmates.
Did Shinso tell him that? Did he come by here?
You asked, breathlessly. Jiro stopped laughing long enough to look confused.
Yeah, he said you were too busy to ask yourself and then took the stairs. He left not too long ago. 10 minutes at most.
Your stare shifted once again to Kaminari, and you pointed towards him.
Yes.
Can you handle this?
You asked in uncertainty. Jiro smiled.
Like I'd miss a second of this. No worries.
She burst out laughing again when Kaminari started giving the couch a thumbs up. You rushed to the stairwell, practically flying up the stairs. You peered into 2 different hallways before you caught the back of Shinso's purple mane of untamed hair disappear behind a corner. You stumbled out into the hallway, barely able to catch your breath until you heard a door open, a splash, and a squeal. You locked eyes with Uraraka, who'd just been doused with water. She was dripping wet and angry.
Really?
She shouted at you with a huff. She stamped her foot and a squish followed.
You pranked me last April Fool's Day. I thought you'd never trick the same person in consecutive years. I just did my hair and makeup.
She pouted out her bottom lip.
It wasn't me.
You tried to explain. Uraka lifted the bucket from the ground, scowling.
Then, whose name is this?
She pointed your name out on the container. You wanted to yell out in frustration. This was far from funny now. Pranks were only fun if you did them yourself. What Shinso was doing wasn't hilarious. It sucked the fun right out of the spirit of April Fool's Day entirely. There was no use trying to tell her otherwise. You knew how this looked.
I'm sorry,
you said. What else could you say? The only person that could vouch for you was Shinso, and he was too busy getting his vengeance for you to even catch up to him. Uraka shouted after you while you sprinted in the direction of where you'd last seen Shinso. Unfortunately for you, you'd lost all trace of him. You had gone up and down the building several times, but didn't find a sign of him. You stopped only to catch your breath, feeling exhausted and frustrated. If you got out of this unscathed, you promised yourself that your pranking days were behind you. You perked up when you heard a door open, followed by a string of swear words. Bakugo had just left his room. A towel was wrapped around his head and he was scratching at it furiously. His crimson glare spotted you, and he narrowed his eyes. He stopped his persistent itching long enough to withdraw the towel from his head, setting it around his broad shoulders. Your eyes nearly popped out of your head when you caught sight of his hair. Instead of his hair's natural blonde, it had become a bright pink. Bakugo lifted his lip into a snarl, approaching you. You couldn't keep yourself from staring up at his now fluorescent hair.
What the hell kind of organic shampoo did you buy me, extra? It itches like crazy.
Bakugo grumbled, scratching his scalp again. You backed up slowly, hoping that by some miracle you'd have a head start over him. If you didn't know that his hair was pink yet, you had a sliver of a chance for survival. At least this prank was funny, even though it would most likely lead you to your early demise. You stifled a laugh, despite yourself, knowing full well that the atomic teenager in front of you could howitzer blast you through the wall. Bakugo scoffed at your untimely jitters.
What the hell is so funny?
Nothing.
You stuttered out quickly, covering your mouth with your hand. A chill ran up your spine when you heard another click of a door open. Todoroki looked at you. Then he looked at Bakugo, with his expressionless jewel-colored eyes. He raised an eyebrow at the two of you. He then nonchalantly pulled his phone from his pocket, taking a picture of Bakugo. The flash was just enough to wake you up from your frozen state.
That's an interesting choice,
Shoto said plainly.
What do you want about Icy Hot?
Bakugo snapped. In one swift motion, Shoto had turned his phone around, showing Bakugo the picture he'd just taken of him. Rage made Bakugo's eye twitch. Explosions popped off in his spread palms. Bakugo's bloodshot eyes shifted. His heated gaze was now wholly back on you.
I'm going to give you a 5-second head start,
he growled. You yelped in fear, already running before Bakugo changed his mind. It didn't take long for you to yell out for Shinso as you raced through the hallways of the dorms, feet pounding and heart racing, as you could hear Bakugo's explosions getting ever closer. You couldn't believe your last words were going to be the name of the person who'd gotten you into this whole mess, but if he didn't clear things up, Bakugo would literally blast you off of the face of the earth.
Shinso! I'm sorry!
You were cut off by a hand grabbing you and pulling you into a nearby closet. You felt arms come around you, covering your mouth to keep you quiet. You struggled for a moment until you heard Shinso's low rumbling chuckle by your ear.
I thought you wanted to find me. If you feel better off facing Bakugo on your own, be my guest,
he said. Your heart thundered in your chest, and you felt your cheeks heat up in embarrassment with how close the two of you were. But you stayed put. You heard Bakugo's explosions get louder, but then dissipate as he passed the closet you were in. Shinso released you, and you turned on him.
Do you have any idea what you put me through today?
You asked him. Shinso smiled cheekily, which you could barely see from the way the light streamed in from the cracks of the door frame.
I told you you'd regret messing with my coffee.
You slapped your forehead with your palm.
Oh, look. You need to tell everybody that it wasn't me that pranked them. Bakugo is literally going to kill me.
Shinso sighed, rolling out his shoulders.
I suppose you've learned your lesson. It's not like you'd try to prank me after this. Besides, I'm tired of coming up with ways to prank the rest of your classmates.
Oh, so now you're stopping out of boredom, and not because you took the pranks a little too far?
You asked. Shinso leaned back, his grin still firmly in place.
They were just jokes, you know.
Shinso shrugged.
They weren't funny,
you said, puffing out your cheeks.
This isn't how April Fool's Day is supposed to work.
No, not even the Bakugo prank was funny.
He teased. You couldn't help but share his smile, while his own jovial expression was still in place.
No?
You stuttered, cracking your serious tone with a small laugh. Shinso shrugged again, opening the closet door after leaning over you.
Shame. I thought that prank would be a good one to go out on.
What are you—
Bakugo, they're over here,
Shinso called out. Your eyes widened, your hand shot out, gripping tightly onto Shinso's shirt to make sure he wouldn't desert you again. When he didn't move, you breathed out a sigh of relief that nearly made Shinso double over in laughter.
Oh, you're going to tell Bakugo, right?
You asked, already done with all of the surprises that you endured that day.
Sure, I'll tell him it's April Fool's Day. I'm not sure he's the type of person that can take a joke, though.
Thank you for tuning in to another fanfiction reading. If you like what I do or would just prefer to fall asleep to my voice, please hit that like button, ring that bell, and possibly, maybe even subscribe to my channel. I would just like to send out my thanks to Agent Arc 88, who has written this lovely April Fool's special for Hitoshi Shinsou. You can go visit them on their, I believe they have a Wattpad and a Tumblr account, and please feel free to give them some praises, read some of their work. They are a fantastic writer, and I really appreciate this submission for this very lovely holiday. But otherwise, thank you so much for visiting. I hope to hear from you soon, next we meet.